Hey there. So here's the thing. I'm 57, I'm Gen X, and I really think Gen X retirement is a completely different game than boomer retirement. Not because one generation is better than another. I'm not here to start a generational comments fight. I'm talking about why retirement is different for us than it was for many people in the generation before us. And I do think there's something important happening right now. A lot of people in their late 40s and 50s or so are planning retirement using a picture of retirement they inherited from their parents or other retirees they know. You work for decades, then you retire at 65, you collect Social Security, go on Medicare. Perhaps you have a pension, buy an RV, play some golf, spoil the grandkids. And honestly, for a lot of baby boomers, that model at least kind of made sense. But for Generation X, I'm not so sure it does. I retired at 55, and the more time I spend living in early retirement and talking with other people who are trying to figure this all out, the more convinced I am that Gen X is facing a very different retirement puzzle. Some of it's harder, some of it is more flexible, and some of it might actually be a huge opportunity if we stop trying to squeeze ourselves into a retirement model that was built for a different generation. So, in this video, I want to walk through why I think Gen X retirement looks so different, what surprised me most once I actually retired, and how I think people in this stage of life should be thinking about the next chapter. Because this is not just a topic for people who've already retired. If you're in your 40s, 50s, or early 60s, this matters because you may be closer to a major life decision than you realize. And the big question may not be, can I retire the way my parents did? The better question might be, what would retirement actually need to look like for me? The first big difference is that Gen X may be the first generation where retirement is less of a template and more of a design project. A lot of boomers had a clearer path, or at least a more familiar path. Many had pensions, more affordable housing earlier in life, and a more traditional idea of when adulthood was supposed to happen. You got the job, you bought the house, you raised the kids, you stayed put, you retired. Was it perfect? Of course it wasn't, but there was a script. Gen X did not exactly grow up with a script. We grew up as latchkey kids, microwave dinners, wood paneled basements, bike ramps made out of scrap plywood, and parents who sometimes only had a vague idea where we were. Our generation was trained pretty early to improvise, so it probably shouldn't surprise us that we're not that interested in a retirement model that says here is the one proper way to get older. What I see instead is a generation asking different questions. Like, do I really want to stay in the same house forever? Do I want to keep working full time or test retirement while still earning a little? Do I need the big house, the big yard, the second car, and all the stuff that used to signal success? Or do I want something that's lighter, simpler, and more flexible? That is the part of this topic that really interests me as an early retiree because once you step away from full time work, you realize how much of your life was built around maintaining the machine, the house near the job, the schedule built around the job, the spending patterns built around the stress of the job, the identity built around the job. And when the job is no longer at the center, a lot of things become negotiable. That's exciting, but it can also be a little unsettling because freedom sounds great until you realize freedom also means you have to decide what to do with it. The second big difference is that Gen X has more responsibility on our shoulders. This is where the fun and rebellious will do retirement our own way. That part meets the less fun part, which is just the math. And math, unfortunately, doesn't care how cool your cassette collection was of the songs you recorded off the radio from the American Top 40 with Casey Kasem. For a lot of people in Generation X, the retirement safety net is not as automatic as it may have looked for prior generations. Fewer people have traditional pensions. More people are relying on 401ks, individual retirement accounts, taxable brokerage accounts, home equity, and whatever they manage to save, while also dealing with kids, aging parents, housing costs, health insurance, and life just throwing its constant curveballs. That means the retirement decision is less about reaching one magic age and more about building a system that's going to hold up. And this is where I think early retirement gives me a different perspective than a lot of working financial professionals. Because when you're still working, it's easy to talk about retirement as just a planning problem. It's, just as spreadsheets, Monte Carlo simulations, withdrawal rates, tax brackets. Those things matter. I use them. I believe in them. But after you retire, retirement stops being a spreadsheet and is, well, reality. It is not just does the plan work over 30 years, it's how do I feel when the markets drops and I don't have a paycheck coming in next Friday. It's how do I make a big spending decision when every dollar now feels like it came out of the pile I need for the rest of my life? It's how do I enjoy the freedom without constantly checking a dashboard like I'm landing a plane in bad weather. That is the part people underestimate. Gen X retirement is different because many of us are not moving from a pension paycheck to Social Security and Medicare in just one neat handoff. We may be bridging years before Medicare. We may be managing our own investments. We may be courting taxes, health insurance, Social Security timing, Roth conversions, brokerage withdrawals, and cash reserves in a way prior generations didn't have to. And yes, if that last sentence made you want to lie down for a minute, I understand. But here's the good news: more responsibility also means more control. If you understand the moving parts, you may have more ways to shape retirement than prior generations did, because you can build a cash runway, you can choose where income comes from, you can decide whether to work part time, consult, maybe start a small business, downsize, relocate, or keep one foot in the working world while buying back your time and testing what full retirement might feel like. That is why I think the old question, when can I retire, is not enough anymore. A better question for Gen X might be, what version of retirement am I actually trying to fund? The third big difference is health insurance. And if you are planning to retire before 65, this one is not optional. Before I retired, I knew health insurance mattered, but once I retired, it became even more apparent that health insurance is really one of the main design constraints of early retirement. For a traditional retiree who works until 65, Medicare is just right there waiting. That doesn't mean healthcare is cheap or simple, but at least the transition is more obvious. For an early retiree, more than likely there's going to be a gap, and that gap can be expensive, confusing, and very sensitive to your reported income. That is one of the big reasons Gen X retirement just looks different. A lot of people in their 50s are physically and mentally ready to do something different before Medicare age. They may be tired of corporate life. I was. They may have aging parents they need to help. They may want to travel while they are still healthy enough to enjoy it. They may have reached the point where another 5 or 10 years of work feels less like security and more like a trade-off they're no longer willing to make. But then health insurance walks into the room wearing steel-toed boots, and suddenly the retirement question is not just, do I have enough saved? It becomes, how will I get coverage? What's it going to cost? How does my income affect it? What happens if subsidies change? What if one spouse keeps working? What if we need to bridge 7, 8, 9, or 10 years before Medicare? This is where a lot of generic retirement advice falls short, because for early retirees, the health insurance bridge is not a footnote. It's a major component of the whole plan, and it can affect decisions that seem unrelated, like selling investments, whether you do Roth conversions, whether you take part-time income, for instance, whether you want to build up a larger cash reserve. What surprised me in early retirement once I started living it is how much it all connects to everything else. We're not just talking about the retirement date, we're talking about the bridge. And for early retirees, the bridge can be where the plan either feels strong or it starts to wobble. The fourth difference is that Gen X may have more family complexity hitting at the exact wrong time. This is one of those things that does not always show up neatly in retirement calculators. A calculator may ask what you spend each year. It may ask your savings balance. It's going to ask your expected Social Security. It's probably not going to ask you, will your adult child need help with housing, or will you still be paying for college when you're trying to leave work, or will your parents need care, or will a family wedding, roof replacement, or any other huge expense come into the picture. For a lot of Gen X households, the timing is messy. Many people had kids later. I did. We didn't have our daughter until we were both in our 30s. Housing's very expensive. College is really expensive. Adult children may need more help getting launched. Our parents are aging and may need more of our attention. And right in the middle of all that, you could be making the biggest financial transition of your life. No pressure. This is one of the reasons I think Gen X retirement planning has to be more honest than just, here is your number. Your number matters, don't get me wrong, but your life also matters too. Two households with the same net worth may have completely different retirement readiness. One has paid off housing, no debt, independent adult children, and a simple lifestyle. The other has a mortgage, family obligations, higher health insurance costs, and parents who may need support. Same net worth, totally different retirement. That is why I keep coming back to the idea that retirement has to be custom built. It's never one size fits all. The real answer depends on your options or trade-offs and the details of your actual life. And that might be especially true for Generation X. We cannot just copy what the previous generation did. We also cannot blindly follow what a calculator says if the calculator is missing the real life stuff. And the real life stuff is usually where retirement gets interesting. The fifth difference is that Social Security feels less certain for Gen X, and this is not just a vague worry anymore. The simplest way to say it is this: according to the latest trustees report, the main Social Security retirement fund is projected to pay full scheduled benefits until 2033. After that, if Congress does nothing, payroll tax money would still be coming in, but it would only cover about 77% of scheduled retirement and survivor benefits. You may also hear people say 20, 34, and 81%, and that refers to the combined Social Security funds, retirement, survivor, and disability benefits looked at together. Either way, the message is the same. Social Security probably is not going away, but Gen X should not build a retirement plan that only works if every projected dollar shows up exactly as promised. And do I think Congress will literally do nothing to prevent this? No, I think they will do something, but I also do not think my retirement plan should depend on Congress doing the perfect thing at the perfect time because, well, that's not exactly been their brand. So to me, the prudent move is to stress test your plan. Maybe you run your numbers assuming you only get 75 to 80% of your projected Social Security benefit, not because that exact cut is guaranteed, of course it's not, but because if your plan still works with a smaller benefit, then any future fix from Congress becomes upside instead of the thing your retirement plan is depending upon. And if your plan doesn't work with a smaller Social Security benefit, that's not a reason to panic. It's just good to know it up front so you can make adjustments to your retirement plan sooner rather than later, rather than be surprised by it at some point in the future, if and when your Social Security benefit does end up getting reduced. Basically, we need to be careful about building a plan that only works if every assumption just goes perfectly. This is especially important for early retirees because when you retire early, you may have a longer period of time before Social Security even enters the picture. That gap has to be funded somehow, and the decision of when to claim Social Security cannot be separated from your portfolio, your tax plan, your health insurance plan, your spouse's benefit, your life expectancy, and how much flexibility you want later. That is why I think the Gen X retirement conversation has to be less about one perfect answer and more about building options. Because options are powerful. Cash gives you options, lower fixed expenses give you options, Roth money, taxable brokerage money, part time income, a paid off house, or even being willing to move can all give you options. And in a world where some of the old retirement assumptions feel less reliable, options may be one of the most underrated forms of security. The sixth difference is that many Gen Xers are not just asking how to retire, they are asking what the next chapter is supposed to be. Because one surprise of early retirement is that the financial question may not be the hardest question. It's a hard question, don't get me wrong, but once you have enough, or once you are close enough to start seriously thinking about it, another question will show up. What do I actually want this next stage to look like? That question can be more uncomfortable than you expect. When you're working full time, the calendar answers a lot of questions for you. Where do I go today? Work. What do I do today? Work stuff. Why am I tired? Work. What am I complaining about at dinner? Well, also work. Then retirement removes that structure. And for a while, that can feel amazing. Then it can feel strange because now you have to create your own structure. You have to decide what matters. You have to decide who you are when you are not your job title. And for Gen X, I think this question lands differently. A lot of us are not necessarily looking for the old retirement image of stopping completely and disappearing into leisure. Some people want that, and that's fine, but many people want a mix. Less stress, but not necessarily zero work. More time, but not a life with no challenge at all. I relate to that. I retired from my main career as a healthcare IT analyst for almost 30 years, but here I am doing the challenge of making YouTube videos and podcast episodes about retirement, among other things, which is also a fun second act and also a great way to put off the honey-do list. Retirement does not mean you stop doing useful things, that you sit in your recliner and watch television all day. That would be incredibly boring. Retirement means you can stop doing the thing you had to do and start choosing the things you want to do. That is very different than the old retirement image where you retire at 65 and then you do well, not a whole lot, and spend most of the rest of your life in front of the television and spoiling your grandkids. That's no longer the picture for Gen X. We want to be more purposeful, more active, and continue to be engaged. Many of us may semi-retire. We may consult, start a small business, travel more, move somewhere new, or build a more creative second act. That independent streak has always been part of Gen X, and retirement may just be another place where it shows up. The seventh difference is that Gen X may be more willing to blow up the default plan, and I do not mean that in a reckless sense. I mean that Gen X seems more open to asking, what if the normal retirement path is not the right path for me? What if I downsize earlier? What if I move somewhere cheaper? What if I work part time instead of full time? What if I retire from the stressful career but not from earning money entirely? What if I stop chasing the biggest possible retirement account and start designing the life I actually want to live? That last one matters because one trap I see is that people assume the only safe path is more, save more, delay more, accumulate more. And sometimes more is the right answer. Sometimes you need to keep working. Sometimes the plan is not ready. Sometimes retiring too early could create stress instead of freedom. But sometimes more becomes a habit. And if you are not careful, you can work years longer than necessary because you never stop to ask what enough actually looks like. That is one of the biggest lessons I've learned from early retirement. Enough is not just a portfolio number, enough is the lifestyle question. If you need an expensive lifestyle, enough is higher. If you want flexibility and are willing to make trade offs, enough may be lower than you think. If you want to stay in a high cost area, keep a large house, travel heavily, help family, that requires one kind of plan. If you are willing to simplify, relocate, reduce fixed expenses, or build a more flexible lifestyle, that's a different plan. The point is that retirement should be designed around your values, not someone else's template. And that is where I think Gen X has a real opportunity. We may not have pensions. We may not have the same housing luck as the previous generation in regards to affordability. We may not have the same confidence that the old systems like Social Security will work exactly as advertised and how it did for the previous generation. But we do have the ability to be flexible, and flexibility can change the math. The eighth difference is that Gen X has to be careful about comparison. This is another one that matters more than people admit because when you look around, it's easy to feel behind. Someone has more saved, someone retired earlier, someone has a pension, someone built a house in 1988 for the price of what a kitchen remodel costs today. Someone else's parents who are completely independent, someone has a paid up house, someone has a rental property. Comparison can make you think retirement is impossible because you're measuring yourself against someone else's life. Knowing what other people have saved is only one side of the equation. The other side is what they actually need. That's a huge point because a person with $1 million and low expenses may be in better shape than a person with $2 million and has a lifestyle that needs every bit of it. The real answer depends on expenses, debt, location, flexibility, health insurance, and whether you're willing to earn anything in retirement. So if you are Gen X and you feel behind, I would be careful about declaring game over. You may need a different plan. You may need to work longer. You may need to save more. You may need to cut expenses, change locations, and rethink the timing. But you also may have more levers than you think. And that is why I don't love generic retirement benchmarks. They can be useful as a rough wake up call, but they also make people feel like failures when the real answer depends on how many things like spending, debt, location, health insurance, taxes, family needs, and what kind of life they actually want in retirement. And that brings me to the biggest takeaway. Gen X retirement is not worse than boomer retirement. It's not better either. It's just different. And different requires different planning. If you are in this generation or close to it, I think there are a few questions worth asking. First, are you planning for the retirement you actually want, or the retirement you were told you were supposed to want? Second, are you focused only on the size of your account? Are you also looking at the life that account needs to support? Third, do you have a bridge plan if you want to retire before Medicare? Fourth, are your fixed expenses low enough to give you options? Fifth, are you building flexibility or are you building a plan that only works if everything goes perfectly? And six, have you thought about what you're retiring to, not just what you're retiring from? That last one is very easy to dismiss, but as an early retiree who's living it, you do need to consider this. Believe me, if you retire and do not know what you're filling your days with that is meaningful to you, that's going to become a real problem. The financial plan matters, but the life plan matters too. And for Gen X, I think the opportunity is to stop treating retirement like a finish line and start treating it like a life redesign and the opportunity to do it. That is what makes this so interesting because as an early retiree, I do not see retirement as one fixed thing anymore. I see it more like a menu. You have full retirement, semi-retirement, part-time work. You could do consulting. You could maybe relocate, maybe even to a different country. Create a second act, more time with family, more time outdoors, more time to take better care of yourself, more time to just be a normal human being who is not checking work emails on vacation. There are more possibilities than the old model suggested, but there are also more decisions, and that's the trade off. The old retirement model gave people a template, the Gen X model gives people a blank page. And a blank page can be really intimidating, but it can also be exactly what we need. So if you are planning retirement right now, especially early retirement, I would not start by asking, how do I copy what worked for someone else? I would start by asking, what would make this next chapter actually work for me? Then build the money plan around that. Generation X grew up figuring things out. Maybe retirement is just the next version of that. If this topic hits home for you, I'd be curious to hear how you see it. Do you think Gen X is redefining retirement? Are you trying to follow a traditional path, or are you designing something that looks different? And if you are already retired or getting close, what part of retirement feels most different from what you expected? Before we go, some freebies to share that are available on my Patreon, and the link is in the description. You can join for free and download these from my tools collection. First, you can download my 12-step early retirement planning checklist. It's a practical, easy follow guide that walks you through everything from calculating your FIRE number to building a tax-efficient withdrawal strategy. Second, if you're on an ACA health plan or are planning to be if and when you retire, download my free ebook, ACA Premium Shock Fix 10 Ways to Pay Less for Marketplace Coverage All Year Long. This ebook gives you a clear, practical framework to lower your ACA premiums legally by understanding and controlling the income number that drives your subsidy, your MAGI, or modified adjusted gross income. And lastly, download my ACA MAGI Estimator. It's an Excel template that can be used to estimate your MAGI for ACA health insurance, and you can also use it to keep track of your MAGI if you're currently on ACA health insurance to help you stay within the 400% FPL thresholds to maintain your subsidies. And if you're interested in more help and while you're on my Patreon taking advantage of the free downloads, you can also check out the paid membership levels. There are options for additional tools, ad-free and early podcast access, and a higher level where you can ask me your retirement questions directly. Lastly, go to mikeupland.com for all of my media. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care and make the most of today.